Capitalism would have died a long time ago, in 1929, if it wasn't for the Second World War. The Second World War essentially saved capitalism by saving American capital. In combination with Roosevelt's New Deal, essentially what happened was central planning saved capitalism. The war allowed the politics to coalesce around a central plan. And then after the war, capitalism was given another lease of life by extending the American central plan in the way that I described during my lecture in Europe and in Japan. And that essentially extended the life of capitalism all the way to the 1970s. That system died when America lost its surpluses. And then capitalism was given another major boost by completely reversing the surplus recycling mechanism that the Americans had created between 1944 and 1971. Remember that between 1944 and 1971, the Americans had a surplus. The money that they were making from the surplus they were giving to Europe and Japan. That was what's happening up until 1971. After that, the Americans had a deficit, which they used to suck into the United States the surplus of Germany, of France, of Japan, and then China. This is what kept capitalism alive. Chinese savings, Japanese savings, profits were created in this country, and in Japan, and in Germany. But it was a kind of symbiosis, because your factories could work fast and well because you had demand from the Americans who didn't have the money. So they printed the money and they gave it to the German capitalists, to the Japanese capitalists, to the Italian capitalists, to the Chinese capitalists, who then did what with the money? They took it to Wall Street. So the recycling gave capitalism its most exuberant, dynamic phase, what we call globalization. Right? It was all globalization, because Bretton Woods was global too. But this is globalization with financialization and anarchy, complete anarchy, because it is the bankers who are doing the recycling, and the governments do not have the control that they used to, at least the American government, or the German government. You remember, in the International Monetary Fund, that was serious discussions they were having up until 1974. They would get together in Washington and decide amongst themselves exchange rates. They were not leaving it to the markets. So after that, it was not anarchic, but an interesting recycling mechanism, which was based on a really non-neoliberal, anti-neoliberal, and anti-capitalist notion. The idea that the whole thing is run on the basis of the American deficit. Without the American deficit, global capitalism would die. This is what I say in this book, which you very kindly brought here. The Global Minotaur. This is what I say about the Minotaur is the American deficit, which needs to be fed by everybody else to keep the world capitalist economy in a kind of unbalanced equilibrium. 2008 was the new 1929. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and that simply accelerated this recycling mechanism, which I call the Minotaur. So 1991 was the end of Soviet communism and Eastern European communism. 2008, the new 1929, this time, I believe, killed capitalism. Because the American political system, which gave capitalism an extended life during the war, in 1945, in the 1970s, after 2008, I don't believe they can do it anymore. I do not believe that capitalism can be given another new lease of life by the American political establishment. You can see, they are dysfunctional. They cannot build nuclear submarines. Take a train from New York to Washington. It doesn't work. It breaks down. You have to go and get out and walk. America has lost its capacity. The American state has been hollowed out. They cannot build bridges. They used to be able to, really very well. Okay? So the American state can no longer manage world capitalism. And in addition to that, going more into the roots of the capital accumulation process, and this is the topic of my last book, which you kindly mentioned, Techno-Feudalism, totally spontaneously, completely unplanned, a new form of capital has been born, what lives in here, with the Googles, the Metas, the Apples, and so on. So you have it too. The only two countries that have it, the United States and China, with Bilibili, with WhatsApp, with Baidu, and so on. But in the West, this capital is completely without control, without political supervision, and it has a fantastic capacity to create new fiefdoms, a new form of feudalism, which is digital feudalism. I call it techno-feudalism. And even though capital has triumphed, capitalism, and that is the main hypothesis of my book, has already been transformed without us even realizing it into a form of techno-feudalism. So in that sense, I'm saying that 2008 was to capitalism that which 1991 was to Soviet communism, its end.
I got your message.